Hello, I'm Lynda Kinkade in Atlanta. We will have much more from the Biden-Putin summit in Geneva in just a few moments. But first, to some of the other headlines today. Well, just days after Israel's new government was sworn in, its military has launched airstrikes in Gaza. Israel Defense Forces say it's in response to incendiary balloons that sparked fires in Israel. You can see the flames there. And this is video of Israeli airstrikes. Now, this is the first major flare-up since a ceasefire ended 11 days of deadly fighting last month between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas. No casualties have been reported. Well, for more on all of this, I want to bring in Hadas Gold from Jerusalem. And Hadas, this is the first flare-up since that ceasefire went into effect last month, and certainly the first test of the new government.
Lynda, that's right. And it goes to show you what a tense situation it is and how quickly things can escalate despite this fragile ceasefire in place. These incendiary balloons, they may seem harmless when you look at the pictures of them. They're often colorful helium balloons, but attached to them are often either explosive devices or other devices that are already lit on fire. And the militants launch them from Gaza into Israel, where they can cause damage and cause fires. Now, no injuries have been reported on the Israeli side from these balloons, but the Israeli military overnight responded with airstrikes. Now, Palestinian media is saying that it was just material damage. There were no casualties called. The Israeli military saying that they struck military complexes as well as Hamas meeting places. But what this indicates, what's important to note, is that in the past, when these balloons were launched from Gaza into Israel, it did not get the sort of response from the Israeli military. It was seemed to be more tolerated. But things have changed since the operation last month, since that 11-day bloody conflict. And what my sources and Israeli officials say is that they've decided to change the calculations, to change the equation, to try to show Hamas militants that they will not tolerate these sorts of balloons any longer. And that's what we saw happen overnight. These military airstrikes, a much harsher response than what we've seen before. And it's an important new test from this government that was just sworn in on Sunday, led by the right-winger Naftali Bennett. Now, the militants also say that they launched these balloons in response to a controversial right-wing flag march yesterday. This is an annual march that celebrates when Israel gained control over the Western Wall and East Jerusalem in the 1967 war. It was supposed to originally take place last month, but it was canceled at the last minute when Hamas fired rockets on Jerusalem, of course, helping to trigger that 11-day war. Now, it took place yesterday. These thousands of these marchers passing by the Damascus Gate, which is the main entrance for Muslim worshippers into the old city of Jerusalem. They were chanting slogans such as "Jerusalem is ours," "Jerusalem is our home." Some were even heard chanting "Death to Arabs," obviously considered a very, very provocative move, not only from their words, but from their just presence being there in front of Damascus Gate. We are also hearing today, Lynda, from officials that more balloons have been launched from Gaza into Israel, causing at least 4 fires. The question, of course, now will be, what will the Israeli government, the Israeli military do in response? Lynda.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, last month we saw more than 260 people killed. In terms of how things are now, it seems like things are pretty calm. But under what conditions could the situation change? Could things escalate?
Well, it's a developing situation as we speak, with more balloons just in the last few hours being launched from Gaza into Israel and causing more fires. Now, Israel has already shown how it plans to respond to these balloons. Now, yesterday there were far more, but there could be more launched later today, and we could see further Israeli airstrikes on Hamas targets or other targets within the Gaza Strip, maybe later tonight. That is what everyone here is waiting to see. What will the Israeli military do in response? Because they've sort of set a new bar, saying they will no longer tolerate these balloons. In the past, airstrikes might have been reserved for maybe rocket fire or something like that. So rockets, of course, are much more dangerous to the Israeli civilian population. But now they're saying that these balloons will also not be tolerated because they do cause damage. They cause these fires not only in farmlands, but also near residential areas and in other nature reserves around the Gaza Strip. So the big question will be, what will the Israeli military, what will this new Israeli government led by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett choose to do?
And just explain for us, how often have these arson balloons been used in the past, and why do they decide to deploy these?
Well, I think that they really started being used in 2018. So it's been several years that they've seen these balloons being used. And if you look at it, you can sort of see why. It's a very simple, easy to make contraption. They're literally using what look like birthday decorations attached to explosive devices or other things that they light on fire. It doesn't really require much setup. It's very inexpensive, but it can cause damage. It lands in the right place, catches things on fire, wide brush. And Israeli officials say that these balloons in the past have ruined thousands of acres of nature reserves as well as farmlands and crops. And so it can cause a lot of damage for quite a simple device. And compared, of course, to launching rockets, which require rocket launchers, which are much more expensive, it's a much more serious endeavor. This is a pretty easy thing to do, which can cause damage. And as we're seeing, it can elicit an Israeli response.
Yeah, it certainly has done that. Hadas Gold for us in Jerusalem. Thanks very much. Well, Olympic organisers in Japan are waiting to see whether a state of emergency will be completely lifted in time for the Games. The minister in charge of the country's COVID countermeasures says if the order is lifted, it could allow up to 10,000 spectators at Olympic events. Well, right now, the state of emergency caps that number at 5,000. And Moscow is taking steps to counter a surge in coronavirus cases. The city plans to mandate vaccinations for workers who come into contact with the public, like people working in retail and healthcare. The government is requiring at least 60% of a business's workforce to be fully vaccinated by mid-August. Russia has been slow to embrace vaccines, with more than 1/3 of all Russians refusing to get a shot. And now to what appears to be an unprecedented maneuver by Chinese military. 28 Chinese warplanes, including those nuclear-capable bombers, made an incursion into Taiwan's air defense zone on Tuesday. Now, this is the largest such incursion since Taiwan began reporting on China's threatening flights last year. And it comes just a day after NATO leaders warned of the military challenge posed by Beijing. We're going to take a short break. My colleagues Poppy Harlow and Jim Shudo will have further coverage on the ongoing Biden-Putin talks in Geneva. Stay with CNN.